Have you heard about supply-side economics?
I've heard about it, but do not know exactly what it means. What is the supply-side economics?
Supply-side economics is an approach to economics that places great emphasis on the effect government policies have on our willingness to work and ability to produce.
What does that mean?
Supply-side economics refers to a group of economists and politicians who actively promote the use of tax cuts and deregulation above all else as a method of restoring rapid economic growth.
What does that mean?
Supply-siders believe that marginal tax rates are too high, and because they are too high, they dramatically reduce the rewards of working, saving and investing, and therefore, hamper economic growth. Likewise, they believe excessive government regulation of business stifles productive economic activity. These views were first made popular during the administration of President Ronald Reagan.
Was Ronald Reagan an economist?
No, Ronald Reagan was not an economist. Ronald Reagan was a movie actor.
Where did the movie actor Ronald Reagan get his economic ideas from?
From conservative neoclassical economists like Friedrich August von Hayek from the University of Vienna, Milton Friedman from the University of Chicago, Michael Boskin from Stanford University and Arthur Laffer from Pepperdine University.
Did these economists have a lot of credibility within the economics profession?
No, not among mainstream economists. The only credibility they held within the economics profession was among like-minded neoconservative ideologues like themselves.
What do critics of the supply-side economics say about the policies promoted by the Ronald Reagan and his followers?
Most mainstream economists today view supply-side economics as an ill-conceived economic theory. Critics of supply-side economics point to the lack of academic economics credentials by movement leaders such as Reagan, Jude Wanniski and Robert Bartley to imply that the theories behind it are bankrupt.
Is there any empirical evidence that supply-side economics actually worked the way it was supposed to?
Yes and no.
What do you mean?
Well, between 1981 and 1992, gross domestic product grew 9 out of 11 years.
And this is good, right?
Yes, but there was a problem.
What was the problem?
Well, the tax cuts, which were the largest in history at the time, led to huge deficits in government revenue.
And deficits are bad because they represent the difference between what the government collects in taxes and what the government spends, and so deficits led to larger public debts.
That is correct. The Reagan tax cuts created a tsunami of red ink. Many people forget this, but Ronald Reagan had some of the largest tax increases in history when he realized this his initial tax cuts were in fact too large.
Did the Reagan tax increases fix the problem of large deficits created by the Reagan tax cuts?
No. The tax increases were not large enough to fix the problem created by the Reagan tax cuts. When Ronald Reagan took over in 1981, the United States held $800 billion worth of public debt. By 1992, the public debt had reached $4.7 trillion. What is more, during 12 years of Reagan and Bush administrations, at no time did the country ever achieve full employment levels.
Well, if the economy is expanding and GDP is growing, but you do not have full employment, does not that suggest that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer?
Yes.
That sounds a lot like class warfare to me.
Yes.
I am not a rocket scientist, but this does not sound like rocket science to me. It does not take a great deal of quantitative insight to understand that these policies promoted by the Reagan were not sustainable in the short run, let alone the long run. Did not anybody see at the time that these were bad ideas?
Yes. Former Treasury Secretary Lloyd Bentsen said that he would give us prosperity too, if you let him write $500 billion worth of hot checks every year. And the former director of the CIA, George Herbert Walker Bush III, when he was running against the Reagan in the 1980 primaries, labeled Reagan's supply-side economic theory as voodoo economics and smoke and mirror economics.
What happened to the supply-side economics?
The fiscal policies of supply-side economics were basically repealed with the election of Bill Clinton as the 42nd President of the United States. Bill Clinton and the Democrats in the House and Senate passed the 1993 Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, which closed many military bases following the end of the Cold War and also raised taxes on the very wealthiest Americans. These policy shifts would eventually balance the budget and, by the year 2000, generate a surplus of $1.6 trillion, with projected surpluses far into the future.
What happened to the $1.6 trillion surplus produced by the Clinton administration?
Those surpluses were all pissed away by the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush.
What do you mean?
George W. Bush gave that $1.6 trillion surplus back to the American people in the form of a tax cut. 67% of that $1.6 trillion was returned to the wealthiest 10% of American income earners.
And how is that supposed to be fair?
Well, according to the W, the wealthiest Americans paid the highest rate of taxes, so, apparently, they were entitled to the largest share of the tax cuts.
So let me get this straight. The W. Bush gave away a $1.6 trillion surplus at a time when the United States had an outstanding debt of $5.1 trillion?
Correct.
How can you have a $1.6 trillion surplus when you owe $5.1 trillion in debt?
It strains credulity, I know. But remember, that W. Bush was from Texas, like Rick Perry.
Did the W. Bush tax cuts create broad-based prosperity and rising government tax revenues as predicted?
No. In fact, just like the Reagan and Bush tax cuts of the 1980s and 1990s which preceded them, the W. Bush tax cuts led to huge deficits, only this time, instead of raising taxes to correct for his errors, W. Bush continued to cut taxes even more, making a bad situation even worse. Did I mention that, at the same time W. Bush was cutting taxes, he started 2 wars, with no way to pay for them?
You must be shitting me. So let me get this straight. At the same time the W is cutting taxes, he is invading other countries without raising tax revenue to pay for them?
That is correct.
Why doesn't somebody just shoot me in the head?
Because we have laws that prevent people from doing such things, although, if Rick Perry was president, he would work to repeal such laws.
What happened to the W. Bush?
After an orgy of deregulation of the banking industry and Wall Street, a powder keg of high-risk mortgage-backed securities blew up the financial system in the fall of 2008. The W and his Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson, who used to run the Goldman Sachs, and the Federal Reserve Chairman, the Ben Bernanke, had to come up with hundreds of billions of dollars to try and bail out the Wall Street investment banks like the Goldman Sachs who engaged in this high-stakes game of investment roulette.
And where did the W, Paulson and Bernanke get the money for these bailouts?
They simply created the money out of thin air, electronically.
You must be shitting me.
I shit you not.
And so what is the debt held by American taxpayers now?
$15 trillion and some change.
So the supply-side economic theory truly is a bankrupt Ponzi scheme of smoke and mirrors which creates wealth for the already wealthy by the extraction of value from the economy as opposed to an economic policy which promotes broad-based prosperity through the creation of value by investing in education and infrastructure.
Yes, you are correct. And we are all in deep voodoo now. Goodbye.